A rising TikTok star with 1 million followers became the face of evil, captured for the world to see as she laughs in court, callously certain her online fame will save her. But behind the curated videos and viral dances, investigators would uncover a toxic obsession and a meticulously planned betrayal that ended a vibrant young life for the most twisted reason imaginable. The case seemed to hinge on digital clues and damning recordings, but the final shocking truth would only be revealed when her own mother stands up, not in support, but in judgment. In the isolated city of Fairbanks, Alaska, where the grip of winter can feel permanent and the darkness of the long nights seems to swallow all secrets, a crime of unimaginable cruelty shattered the community's sense of security. Mila Woods, a bright and beloved 19-year-old known for her infectious optimism, was found dead in her small off-campus apartment, the victim of a brutal and calculated act of violence. The crime was not a random home invasion or a tragic accident, but a betrayal born from a shared, twisted fantasy between two young women who had made a pact with evil. This was a murder committed for the thrill of the experience, a dark bond sealed in the heart of the Alaskan wilderness. Mila Woods was the kind of person who seemed to generate her own light, a vital warmth in a city that spent months in the twilight of the far north. She was a first-year student at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, studying to be a veterinary technician, a path driven by a lifelong adoration for animals. Friends and family described her as relentlessly kind, someone who would stop to help a stranded motorist in a blizzard or spend her meager savings on food for the local animal shelter. Her social media was a wholesome collection of rescued sled dogs, stunning photos of the aurora borealis, and joyful moments with the small circle of friends she had quickly made since moving from Anchorage for school. She represented the very best of the resilient, community-focused spirit that defined life in Fairbanks, a place where neighbors relied on each other to survive the unforgiving landscape. Her best friend and the architect of her demise was Lily Porter. Also 19, Lily was Mila's opposite, a creature of the digital world who had cultivated a significant online following as a TikTok star. While Mila found beauty in the quiet solitude of the Alaskan frontier, Lily chased the fleeting validation of likes and shares, her entire identity constructed from viral trends and carefully edited video clips. To her 1.2 million followers, she was a bubbly, charismatic personality, but in reality she was a deeply insecure and manipulative individual who saw Mila's genuine goodness not as something to admire, but as a resource to be exploited. Lily's apartment, just 1 floor below Mila's, was a stage meticulously designed for her videos, a world of ring lights and curated backdrops that bore no resemblance to the rugged reality of life just outside her window. The friendship between Mila and Lily had always been unequal, a dynamic of parasitic attachment that Mila, in her trusting nature, failed to recognize as dangerous. Mila was Lily's unpaid photographer, her emotional support system, and often the unwitting subject of content that mocked her small-town sincerity for online engagement. The relationship was a textbook example of toxic codependence, fueled by Lily's insatiable need for an audience and Mila's deep-seated desire to see the good in everyone. In the isolation of Fairbanks, their bond intensified, creating a closed loop of emotional manipulation where Lily's influence over her friend grew into something sinister and all-consuming. It was a relationship that, to any outside observer, was a tragedy waiting to happen, a slow-motion collision of authentic kindness and performative cruelty. The pact was sealed during one of the longest nights of the Alaskan winter, a stretch of near-perpetual darkness that can weigh heavily on the human psyche. Fueled by alcohol and a sense of nihilistic boredom, Lily proposed a twisted game to another impressionable acquaintance, a quiet and withdrawn young man who was equally enthralled by her online persona. She framed it as the ultimate content play, a shocking act that would make them infamous, transcending the ephemeral world of TikTok challenges and catapulting them into legendary status. The plan was simple and sadistic. They would murder Mila Woods together, not for any specific reason, but for the shared experience, to prove they could do something no one else would dare. It was a thrill kill conceived in the cold digital glow of a smartphone screen, a testament to a generation's desperate and depraved search for meaning in online notoriety. The execution of their plan was chilling in its methodical cruelty. Using their established friendship as a weapon, Lily lured Mila into a false sense of security, inviting her to her apartment for what she claimed was a celebration of hitting a new follower milestone. The third party to their pact was there, a silent and unnerving presence in the corner of the room, his role designated as the documentarian of the night's events. The air was thick with a sense of manufactured joy, a grotesque parody of a real friendship, as Lily poured drinks and spoke of her grand plans for her digital empire. Mila, ever supportive, celebrated alongside her, oblivious to the fact that her life was a prop in a performance designed to end in her death, her trust a fatal vulnerability in the face of such profound evil. The act itself was a horrifying reflection of its motive, cold, detached, and performative. There was no messy struggle, no crime of passion, just the quiet, efficient execution of a premeditated plan. Lily, the charismatic star, directed the scene while her accomplice filmed, capturing the final moments of Mila's life with the same dispassionate eye one would use for a viral dance trend. Mila Woods died in that sterile, brightly lit apartment, her final breaths taken on a stage built for likes and shares, her murder a piece of content that would, thankfully, never be uploaded. In the aftermath, the two young killers acted not with panic or remorse, but with a chilling sense of accomplishment, as if they had just completed a particularly difficult and satisfying project. After the murder, Lily and her accomplice meticulously cleaned the apartment, following a checklist they had researched online weeks prior. Every surface was wiped down, every piece of evidence carefully bagged and prepared for disposal. They moved Mila's body back to her own apartment upstairs, staging the scene to look like a suicide, another detail borrowed from their extensive online research into criminal forensics and police procedure. They were not just killers, they were students of the true crime genre, using the knowledge they had gleaned from documentaries and podcasts to try and commit the perfect crime. It was a horrifying example of life imitating art, where the detached consumption of tragedy had bled into the creation of a new one. Their belief in their own intellectual superiority was absolute, a fatal arrogance born from a life lived through a screen. Leaving Mila's apartment, Lily paused to record a short, tearful TikTok video, a masterpiece of feigned grief in which she spoke of her best friend and the unthinkable tragedy that had occurred. The video went viral almost instantly, her followers flooding the comments with messages of sympathy and support, completely unaware that they were watching a performance by a killer, her tears as fake as the curated happiness in her other posts. Lily Porter had successfully turned her friend's murder into content, leveraging the very act of killing for the currency she valued above all else, attention. In the stark, unforgiving landscape of Fairbanks, Alaska, under the faint, ethereal glow of the northern lights, a new kind of monster had been born. One who believed that fame was not just a goal, but a shield that would protect her from any and all consequences. She was wrong. The investigation into the death of Mila Woods began with a grim discovery of her body by a concerned neighbor who had not seen her for 2 days. The initial assessment of the scene, with its lack of forced entry and the carefully arranged setting, did indeed point towards the possibility of suicide, just as Lily Porter had intended. However, for lead detective Dennis Lopez of the Fairbanks Police Department, something felt profoundly wrong. Lopez was a veteran officer who had spent 20 years navigating the unique challenges of law enforcement in the Alaskan interior. He was a man accustomed to the quiet desperation that could fester during the long, dark winters, but the scene in Mila's apartment was too clean, too deliberate, and too perfect. His instincts, honed by years of investigating everything from frostbite-related deaths to violent crimes in isolated cabins, told him that he was not looking at a tragedy of self-harm, but at a carefully constructed lie. The first person Detective Lopez interviewed was Lily Porter, who played the part of the grieving best friend with theatrical perfection. She sobbed on cue, her voice cracking as she recounted her last conversation with Mila, painting a picture of a troubled young woman who was struggling with the pressures of university life. It was a compelling performance, one that might have convinced a less experienced officer, but Lopez noted the inconsistencies, the small but significant details that didn't align with the evidence he had already gathered. He observed the way her eyes, though red from feigned crying, remained sharp and watchful, constantly assessing his reactions. He saw a performer, not a person in mourning, and his suspicion hardened into a quiet certainty that he was sitting across from the killer. He knew the truth was hidden somewhere behind that mask of sorrow, and he was determined to peel it back, layer by painstaking layer. The break in the case came not from a forensic miracle, but from meticulous, old-fashioned police work, combined with an understanding of the digital world the suspect inhabited. Detectives began by pulling security camera footage from the apartment building and surrounding businesses, painstakingly creating a timeline of the night Mila died. The footage revealed a critical inconsistency in Lily's story. She claimed to have been home alone, editing videos, but the cameras showed her and her male accomplice leaving the building in the middle of the night, carrying heavy trash bags to a dumpster several blocks away. This single piece of evidence shattered her alibi and gave investigators the leverage they needed. It was a classic mistake, an act of overconfidence from a killer who believed she was too smart to be caught by something as mundane as a convenience store's security camera. When Detective Lopez brought Lily Porter back in for a second interview, the atmosphere was different. He presented her with the still images from the security footage, laying them on the interrogation room table one by one. He watched as her confident facade began to crack, the color draining from her face as she was confronted with the undeniable proof of her lie. For a moment, she was no longer a TikTok star with 1 million adoring fans. She was just a 19-year-old girl in a small, cold room, her digital world a universe away from the harsh reality of a murder investigation. The power dynamic had shifted, and the truth, which had been buried under a mountain of digital artifice, was beginning to surface. Lily's reaction was not one of confession or remorse, but of a deeply unsettling and bizarre form of passive aggression. After her initial shock faded, she did not speak. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, crossed her arms, and closed her eyes, feigning sleep. It was a stunning act of defiance, a tactic of extreme contempt designed to communicate her utter lack of concern for the proceedings. Detective Lopez, a man who had seen every form of human depravity, had never witnessed such a complete and chilling disconnect from reality. She was not just uncooperative, she was performing her own indifference, treating the interrogation as just another inconvenience, an unwelcome interruption to her far more important life online. Her accomplice, when brought in separately, crumbled almost immediately. He was not a hardened criminal, but a lost and impressionable young man who had been swept up in Lily's manipulative orbit. Faced with the same video evidence and the stern, unflinching gaze of seasoned detectives, he confessed to everything. He described the pact, the planning, and the horrifying details of the murder itself, his story corroborating every suspicion Detective Lopez had held. He painted a portrait of Lily Porter as a cold and calculating ringleader, a master manipulator who had orchestrated the entire event for her own twisted amusement and a desperate grab for a more permanent form of fame. His confession gave the police everything they needed to secure an arrest warrant for Lily. While she continued her silent, sleeping protest in the interrogation room, the wheels of justice were already turning against her, powered by the words of the very person she had chosen as her partner in crime. The pact they had made in the dark was now being broken under the harsh fluorescent lights of the police station. The arrest of Lily Porter was a quiet and anticlimactic affair. When officers entered the interrogation room to inform her she was being charged with first-degree murder, she did not react. She simply opened her eyes, offered a small, bored sigh, and allowed herself to be handcuffed, her expression a mixture of theatrical annoyance and deep-seated arrogance. There were no tears, no protestations of innocence, just the quiet, chilling calm of a person who believed they were untouchable. As she was led from the room, she passed the window where her accomplice was being questioned, and she shot him a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. It was the look of a director whose supporting actor had failed to remember their lines, a silent condemnation that spoke volumes about her monstrous narcissism and her complete inability to comprehend the gravity of her actions. Her performance was over, but she did not yet realize that the final act of her story would not be taking place on TikTok, but in a court of law. The news of the arrest sent shockwaves through the small community of Fairbanks and exploded across the internet. Lily's followers were divided, with many refusing to believe that the bubbly, charismatic young woman they watched every day could be capable of such a heinous act. A vocal minority, however, began to see the truth, re-examining her past videos through a new, more critical lens. They saw the subtle cruelty, the casual mockery of her supposed best friend, and the insatiable hunger for attention that lay just beneath the surface of her carefully crafted online persona. The digital kingdom she had built for herself was beginning to crumble, its foundations revealed to be nothing more than a shallow pit of narcissism and lies. In her jail cell, isolated from her followers and her phone, Lily Porter remained serenely confident, fully believing that this was all just a temporary setback. She was a star, and in her world, stars didn't face consequences, they just faced more opportunities for content. The endless Alaskan night had hidden her crime for a time, but the dawn was coming, and with it a reckoning she could never have imagined. With Lily Porter and her accomplice in custody, prosecutor Raymond Perez began the arduous task of building a case that could withstand the inevitable media scrutiny and the sophisticated legal defense that Lily's online earnings could almost certainly afford. Perez was a sharp, methodical prosecutor who had made his career in the Alaskan justice system, known for his no-nonsense approach and his deep empathy for victims. He understood that in a case this sensational, public opinion could be as powerful as legal precedent, and he knew the defense would try to paint Lily as a troubled, misunderstood youth. His mission was not just to secure a conviction, but to reveal the true, calculated malice that lay behind her seemingly reckless act. He needed to dismantle the TikTok persona and expose the monster hiding in plain sight. The accomplice's confession provided a solid foundation for the prosecution, offering a detailed roadmap of the crime from its conception to its execution. However, Perez knew that a case built solely on the testimony of a co-conspirator was vulnerable. The defense would undoubtedly attack his credibility, portraying him as a liar, trying to save himself by shifting all the blame to Lily. Perez needed more. He needed irrefutable, objective evidence that would corroborate the accomplice's story and demonstrate Lily's role as the primary instigator. He tasked Detective Lopez and his team with conducting a deep dive into every aspect of Lily's digital life, a forensic excavation of her hard drives, social media accounts, and online communications. They were searching for the digital ghost of the crime, the electronic breadcrumbs that would lead a jury to the inescapable truth of her guilt. The Forensic Technology Unit worked for weeks, meticulously combing through terabytes of data recovered from Lily's devices. They analyzed deleted files, encrypted chat logs, and the metadata of every photo and video she had ever created. It was in the fragmented data of a wiped laptop that they found the first major twist in the case. Buried in the computer's search history were hundreds of queries that painted a chilling picture of methodical planning. Lily had spent months researching topics that had no place in the life of an ordinary 19-year-old girl. She had looked into the lethal dosages of household chemicals, the symptoms of various poisons, and most disturbingly, how to purchase exotic toxins from the dark web without leaving a trace. It was clear that the murder of Mila Woods was not a spontaneous, thrill-seeking act as the accomplice had described. It was the culmination of a long and deliberate process of research and preparation. This discovery fundamentally changed the prosecution's understanding of the case. They had initially believed the murder was a twisted pact, a shared delusion between two impressionable youths. Now they saw it as something far more sinister, a calculated plot orchestrated by Lily Porter alone. The poisoner's shopping list, as the investigators began to call the search history, proved that she had been planning to kill Mila long before she ever involved her easily manipulated accomplice. He was not her partner. He was just another tool she had used to achieve her goal, a disposable pawn in her sadistic game. The motive was still unclear, but the premeditation was now undeniable, etched into the digital fabric of her laptop's memory. The search history provided a timeline of her escalating obsession, a window into the cold and patient mind of a budding psychopath. Further investigation into her online purchases confirmed their fears. Using cryptocurrency to mask her transactions, Lily had successfully purchased a small quantity of a rare and highly toxic substance, a chemical often used in industrial manufacturing that was nearly impossible to trace in a standard autopsy. The delivery records obtained through a subpoena to a package forwarding service showed that the poison had arrived in Fairbanks a full month before Mila's death. This was the smoking gun Perez had been searching for. The defense could argue that her accomplice was a liar, but they could not argue with a digital paper trail that led directly from a dark web poison vendor to Lily Porter's front door. The narrative of a reckless thrill kill was collapsing, replaced by the far more horrifying reality of a cold-blooded, premeditated poisoning. The autopsy report on Mila Woods had to be revisited. The initial cause of death had been listed as undetermined with signs of asphyxiation but no clear evidence of foul play, a result of Lily's careful staging of the scene. Armed with the new information about the specific poison Lily had purchased, the medical examiner was able to conduct a more targeted toxicological screening. The results were conclusive. Trace amounts of the exact industrial toxin were found in Mila's system. The poison was designed to mimic the effects of a sudden cardiac event, leaving behind very little evidence. Without the digital trail, it was a near-perfect murder, a crime that might have remained unsolved forever. The search history had not only proven premeditation, but it also provided the final, crucial piece of the forensic puzzle. This revelation had a profound effect on the accomplice's legal situation. Realizing he had been manipulated and used as a disposable alibi by someone far more cunning and evil than he had ever imagined, he agreed to cooperate fully with the prosecution in exchange for a plea deal. His testimony would now be supported by a mountain of irrefutable digital and forensic evidence. He was no longer just an accomplice pointing a finger, he was a corroborating witness whose story fit perfectly with the scientific facts. Prosecutor Perez now had a case that was not just strong, but virtually airtight. He could prove not only that Lily Porter had killed her best friend, but that she had planned to do so for months, with a level of cold, calculated cruelty that defied her age and her bubbly online persona. The poisoner's shopping list became the central pillar of the prosecution's strategy. It was a piece of evidence that was both scientifically damning and psychologically revealing. It allowed Perez to construct a narrative that would show the jury the true Lily Porter, a young woman who lived a double life. To the world, she was a smiling, dancing TikTok star. In secret, she was a meticulous researcher of death, a patient and disciplined student of the art of killing. The endless Alaskan winter nights had not created a monster out of boredom. They had simply provided the perfect isolated environment for a monster who had been there all along to meticulously plan her masterpiece. The case was no longer about a pact. It was about a predator and her prey. In the months leading up to the trial, as the Alaskan winter finally gave way to the brief but intense summer, Lily Porter's behavior in pretrial hearings began to reveal the true depths of her narcissism and her utter contempt for the legal system. Stripped of her smartphone and her audience of millions, she sought to turn the courtroom itself into her new stage and the captive audience of lawyers, reporters, and court officers into her unwilling followers. Her performance was not one of sorrow or fear, but of a chilling and defiant arrogance. She seemed to view the entire process as a deeply insulting inconvenience, a bureaucratic hurdle to be overcome before she could return to her rightful place at the center of the digital universe. This was not a defendant fighting for her life. It was a celebrity enduring a tedious and poorly produced reality show. Her interactions with her own defense team were a masterclass in manipulation and disrespect. Her family had hired one of the most expensive and respected defense attorneys in Alaska, a man renowned for his sharp legal mind and his commanding courtroom presence. Yet Lily treated him like an incompetent assistant. She openly scoffed at his legal advice, rolled her eyes during strategy meetings, and frequently interrupted him to offer her own, far superior ideas, most of which seemed to be drawn from television legal dramas. Her lawyers' carefully prepared defense, built around portraying her as a victim of her accomplice's influence, was being systematically undermined by his own client's refusal to appear even remotely sympathetic or remorseful. The legal team was in an impossible position, forced to defend a client who seemed determined to prove the prosecution's case for them. The most shocking displays of her contempt, however, were reserved for the courtroom itself. During one particularly dull procedural hearing, a local news station's courtroom sketch artist captured an image that would quickly become a defining symbol of the case. While lawyers debated a motion, Lily was not paying attention. Instead, she was doodling on a legal pad, and the sketch artist, with a few deft strokes, captured the profane and violent nature of her drawings. The sketch depicted a crude stick figure, clearly labeled with the victim's name, being gleefully pushed off a cliff by another figure labeled M.E. The drawing was published on the front page of the Fairbanks Daily News-Miner the next day, and the image went viral, a shocking visual confirmation of the prosecution's claims of her utter lack of remorse. She had once again turned her friend's death into a piece of content, a private joke for an audience of one. This incident was not an isolated one. Lily seemed to relish the attention of the media, playing to the cameras as she was escorted to and from the courthouse. She would smile, wave, and even blow kisses, treating the perp walk like a red carpet. Her courtroom demeanor was a calculated performance of boredom and disdain. She would yawn theatrically during testimony that detailed the gruesome facts of the case, clean her fingernails with a paperclip while experts discussed forensic evidence, and tap out complex, distracting rhythms on the defendant's table with her pen. Every action was designed to communicate one simple message: this was all beneath her. She was a star, and the drab, serious world of the Alaskan justice system was simply not up to her standards of entertainment. Her behavior was so disruptive that the judge had to repeatedly admonish her, his warnings growing sterner with each passing hearing, though they had no discernible effect on her conduct. Behind the scenes, her arrogance continued to manifest in new and infuriating ways. From jail, she filed a series of frivolous motions, complaining about everything from the quality of the vegan meal options to the thread count of her bed sheets. She demanded access to a high-speed internet connection to manage her brand, an absurd request that was summarily denied. It was a stunning display of narcissistic priorities, a clear indication that her primary concern was not the life she had taken or the life sentence she was facing, but the potential damage to her online following. In her mind, the real tragedy of the situation was the interruption of her content schedule and the temporary loss of her platform. She saw herself as the true victim, a creative genius being unfairly persecuted by a system that simply didn't understand the pressures of being a digital celebrity. Her defense team grew increasingly exasperated. They pleaded with her to show some sign of humanity, some flicker of empathy that they could present to a jury. They coached her on how to appear remorseful, how to speak about Mila with sadness and respect, and how to project an image of a scared, contrite young woman. Lily would listen to their advice, nod thoughtfully, and then do the exact opposite, her every action in court a silent act of rebellion against the narrative her own lawyers were trying to build. It became clear to her legal team that Lily Porter was not just uncooperative, she was fundamentally incapable of seeing the world from any perspective but her own. She was a black hole of narcissism, and her performance in the pre-trial hearings was not an act of defiance, but a genuine expression of her pathologically self-obsessed worldview. The prosecution, meanwhile, watched these displays with a mixture of professional satisfaction and personal disgust. Every smirk, every eye roll, and every profane doodle was a gift to their case. They began to compile a portfolio of her courtroom behavior, a collection of sketch artist drawings, reporters' notes, and bailiffs' testimonies that they planned to use to illustrate her character to the jury. Prosecutor Raymond Perez knew that the most powerful evidence against Lily Porter might not be the digital forensics or the accomplice's testimony, but Lily herself. He was preparing to put her personality on trial, confident that if the jury could see even a fraction of the contempt and arrogance she had displayed, they would have no trouble convicting her. The mask of the grieving friend had been discarded, replaced by the sneering, bored face of a killer who believed she was above the law. As the final pre-trial hearing concluded, Lily was led from the courtroom. As she passed the gallery, she caught the eye of Mila's weeping mother and offered a small, almost imperceptible smirk. It was a final, silent act of cruelty, a gesture of profound contempt for the family whose life she had destroyed. The court sketch artist who had been watching her closely captured the moment perfectly: the grieving mother, her face etched with pain, and the defendant, her face a mask of cold, triumphant disdain. That sketch, like the one before it, would circulate widely, cementing in the public's mind the image of Lily Porter not as a troubled teen, but as a young and unrepentant monster. She was walking into her trial not just as a defendant, but as a villain of her own making, blissfully unaware that her greatest performance was about to come to a crashing and decisive end. The first day of the trial of Lily Porter opened under the perpetual twilight of the Alaskan autumn, the muted light outside reflecting the somber mood within the Fairbanks courthouse. The courtroom was packed to capacity, a tense and silent assembly of local residents, national media, and the shattered family of Mila Woods. At the defendant's table, Lily Porter sat with an air of detached amusement, as if she were a special guest at a rather dull movie premiere. She whispered and joked with her long-suffering defense attorney, her gaze occasionally drifting to the jury box with a look of casual assessment like a director sizing up a potential cast. The entire room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the formal proceedings to begin, the air thick with the anticipation of the legal battle that was about to unfold. Prosecutor Raymond Perez approached the podium with a heavy sense of purpose. He was a man who understood the power of narrative, and he knew that his opening statement had to accomplish two things. It had to humanize Mila Woods in a way that made her absence a palpable presence in the room, and it had to strip away Lily Porter's glamorous online persona to reveal the cold-hearted killer beneath. He began not with an accusation or a recitation of legal statutes, but with a simple, poignant act. He requested that the courtroom lights be dimmed, and on a large screen facing the jury, a video began to play. It was a short, candid clip from Mila's phone, showing her laughing as she played with a litter of sled dog puppies, her face a perfect portrait of youthful joy and unrestrained kindness. The video was silent, but its message was deafening. This was the life that had been stolen. As the video ended and the lights slowly came back up, a heavy silence hung in the air. Mila Woods was no longer just a name on a legal document. She was a vibrant, living memory, and her loss felt immediate and profound. It was into this emotionally charged atmosphere that Raymond Perez delivered his opening statement. He spoke in a calm, measured tone, his voice devoid of anger but filled with a quiet, resolute sadness. He walked the jury through the timeline of the crime, detailing the toxic friendship, the manipulative control, and the cold, methodical planning that had led to Mila's death. He described Lily not as a reckless teenager, but as a patient and disciplined predator who had studied her victim, researched her methods, and executed her plan with chilling precision. He held up a thick binder, the printed-out record of her poisoner's shopping list, and told the jury that they were looking at a blueprint for murder. The defense, in its opening statement, attempted to paint a starkly different picture. Lily's attorney argued that his client was the true victim, a vulnerable and mentally fragile young woman who had been manipulated by a violent and obsessive accomplice. He claimed that the so-called pact was a fantasy concocted by the co-defendant to save himself, and that Lily had been an unwilling and terrified witness to a crime she was powerless to stop. He portrayed her online persona not as an act of narcissism, but as a desperate cry for help, the only way she knew how to cope with the trauma she was experiencing. It was a skillful and compelling narrative, but it was delivered to a jury that had just seen the genuine, unscripted joy on Mila Woods' face, and the contrast was jarring. The defense was asking the jury to believe that the girl in the video was somehow responsible for her own death, a victim-blaming strategy that immediately put them at a disadvantage. The first witness called by the prosecution was Mila's mother, a woman who carried her grief with a quiet, heartbreaking dignity. She spoke of her daughter's dreams, her kindness, and the profound void her death had left in their family. Her testimony was simple, direct, and devastatingly effective. She did not speak with anger, but with a deep and abiding love for her lost child, and her words painted a vivid portrait of the human cost of Lily Porter's actions. As she spoke, Lily watched her with a look of detached curiosity, her head tilted slightly as if she were analyzing a particularly interesting specimen. There was no empathy in her gaze, no flicker of remorse, only the cold, analytical stare of a predator who feels nothing for its prey. It was a moment of profound disconnect that did not go unnoticed by the jury. The prosecution then began to build its case brick by evidentiary brick. They called the neighbor who found the body, the first responders who arrived at the scene, and the detectives who had pieced together the initial timeline. Each witness added another layer of detail, another piece of the puzzle that pointed directly toward Lily Porter. The security camera footage was played, showing Lily and her accomplice leaving the building with the heavy trash bags in the dead of night, a silent and grainy refutation of her alibi. The jury saw the receipts from a local hardware store where Lily had purchased the cleaning supplies used to sanitize the crime scene, her signature a clear and damning indictment on the credit card slip. Every piece of evidence was a link in a chain that was slowly and inexorably tightening around the defendant. The accomplice took the stand next, his testimony lasting for 2 full days. He spoke in a low, halting voice, his eyes fixed on the floor as he recounted the details of the pact and the murder. He described Lily's charisma, her power to make him feel important, and her chilling, casual proposal to kill their friend for the thrill of it. He admitted to his role in the crime, his voice thick with a shame and self-loathing that stood in stark contrast to Lily's defiant indifference. During his testimony, Lily scribbled furiously on her legal pad, not taking notes but drawing another series of grotesque caricatures of him, which she would occasionally and subtly flash in his direction. It was a silent campaign of intimidation, a desperate attempt to rattle the witness who held her fate in his hands, but it only served to reinforce the prosecution's portrayal of her as a cruel and remorseless manipulator. The final piece of the prosecution's opening salvo was the presentation of the digital evidence. A forensic expert from the Alaska State Crime Lab took the jury on a guided tour of Lily Porter's hard drive. He showed them the deleted search histories, the bookmarks for dark web marketplaces, and the encrypted chat logs where Lily had discussed her plans with a chillingly casual tone. He explained how she had used sophisticated software to try and cover her tracks, a level of technical proficiency that spoke to a clear and calculating mind. The jury saw the digital ghost of a murder, a crime that had been planned and rehearsed in the cold, binary world of a computer long before it was ever committed in the real world. As the first phase of the trial concluded, Raymond Perez was confident that he had succeeded in his goal. The jury was no longer looking at a TikTok star, they were looking at a killer, and the vibrant, joyful image of Mila Woods playing with puppies was an unforgettable reminder of exactly what had been lost. As the trial moved into its second week, the prosecution prepared to introduce its most damning and technologically advanced piece of evidence, one that would allow Mila Woods to speak from beyond the grave. The isolated nature of life in Fairbanks meant that many residents, Mila included, had embraced smart home technology to stay connected and manage their lives during the long, dark winters. In Mila's apartment, a small, unassuming smart speaker sat on her kitchen counter, a device she used to play music, check the weather, and call her family. What no one, not even Lily Porter with all her meticulous research, had considered was that these devices were always listening, and sometimes they were recording. Prosecutor Raymond Perez called an audio forensics expert to the stand, a specialist from the FBI's laboratory in Quantico who had been flown in specifically for this case. The expert explained that while smart speakers are not constantly recording everything, they do save short audio clips when they are activated by a wake word. The device in Mila's apartment had been triggered multiple times on the night of her murder. The expert had painstakingly analyzed the encrypted audio files recovered from the company's servers, filtering out background noise and enhancing the faint, terrified whispers he had discovered. He told the jury that he had been able to reconstruct a portion of the final conversation that took place in Lily Porter's apartment, a conversation that would change everything. A heavy silence fell over the courtroom as the court clerk played the audio file. The recording was short, less than 30 seconds long, and filled with static, but the voices were clear and unmistakable. First, there was Mila's voice, high and thin with terror, pleading, "Lily, why are you doing this? I thought you were my friend." The raw, desperate fear in her words was a punch to the gut, a horrifyingly intimate glimpse into the final moments of her life. Then, after a short pause, another voice could be heard, a voice that was cold, calm, and utterly devoid of emotion. It was Lily Porter, her tone flat and dismissive as she replied, "Don't be so dramatic. This is for content. You're going to make me famous." The recording ended with a soft, chilling laugh from Lily, a sound that hung in the air like a poisonous vapor. The impact on the courtroom was immediate and visceral. Members of the jury gasped, their faces a mixture of horror and disbelief. Mila's mother let out a strangled sob, collapsing into the arms of her husband. Even the seasoned reporters in the gallery seemed shaken, their pens frozen above their notepads. The recording was more than just evidence, it was a resurrection. It had given Mila Woods a voice, allowing her to testify against her own killer, her final words a heartbreaking testament to the depth of the betrayal she had suffered. And it had captured the true nature of Lily Porter's malice, her cold, transactional view of a human life, and the sickeningly casual cruelty of her motive. The smart device had become the most powerful witness in the room. Lily Porter's reaction to the recording was perhaps the most damning part of the entire presentation. As the audio played, a slow, knowing smile spread across her face. She did not look shocked or scared, she looked proud. She leaned over to her attorney and whispered something that was clearly audible to the court reporter sitting nearby. "See, I told you it was a good line." Her lawyer recoiled from her as if he had been burned, his face a mask of utter disgust. In that single, horrifying moment, Lily had not only confirmed the authenticity of the recording, but had also revealed her monstrous narcissism to the entire world. She was not just a killer. She was a producer, and she was still critiquing her own work, proud of the chilling dialogue she had delivered during the murder of her best friend. The jury watched her, their expressions hardening from shock into a cold, unified anger. The smart speaker recording fundamentally altered the landscape of the trial. It directly refuted the defense's entire narrative that Lily was a passive, manipulated victim. It proved, in her own words, that she was not only a willing participant, but the driving force behind the crime. Her motive, which had been a subject of speculation, was now laid bare. She had killed her friend for fame, for content, for the fleeting and hollow validation of online notoriety. The recording transformed the case from a complex circumstantial puzzle into a simple and horrifying story of cold-blooded, narcissistic ambition. The defense's strategy was in tatters, destroyed by 30 seconds of audio recovered from a kitchen countertop. Her lawyer, a man who had built a career on finding reasonable doubt in the most difficult of cases, now looked utterly defeated, trapped in the impossible position of defending the indefensible. The prosecution pressed its advantage, recalling the accomplice to the stand. Perez played the recording for him and asked him to confirm the voices and the context. The young man broke down completely, his body racked with sobs as he was forced to relive the horrifying moments the recording had captured. Through his tears, he confirmed that those were their voices and that Lily's words on the tape were exactly what she had said as she committed the murder. His emotional breakdown, so raw and genuine, stood in stark and sickening contrast to Lily's proud, smiling reaction. The jury saw one participant consumed by guilt and the other reveling in her own cruelty, and in that contrast, any lingering doubt about who was the true architect of the crime evaporated completely. The story of the smart device witness dominated the news coverage of the trial. Legal analysts hailed it as a landmark moment in the use of digital forensics in the courtroom, a case that would set a new precedent for how technology could be used to uncover the truth. But for the family of Mila Woods, it was something far more personal. It was a final, unexpected gift from their daughter, a last message that ensured her killer would be held accountable. The device she had used to play music had, in the end, played the song of justice in the cold, isolated expanse of Fairbanks, where secrets were so easily kept. A small piece of technology had become a beacon of truth, its electronic ear capturing a whisper of evil that would now echo with the full force of the law. Lily Porter had wanted to be famous, and now she was. She was no longer just a TikTok star. She was the girl who had confessed her motive into a smart speaker, her own voice the undeniable proof of her monstrous heart. Following the devastating impact of the smart speaker recording, the defense was left with a seemingly impossible task. Their initial strategy of portraying Lily Porter as a manipulated victim was now completely untenable. The audio evidence had shown her to be a cold, calculating, and active participant. Forced to pivot, her attorney made a high-risk decision. He would build a new defense around the idea that the recording was a fabrication and that the murder weapon, the industrial poison, was something Lily had never possessed. It was a desperate gambit, one that would require the jury to believe in a vast and complex conspiracy involving the FBI, the local police, and the state's own witnesses. It was a strategy born not of evidence, but of necessity. The defense began by calling their own audio expert to the stand, a hired gun from out of state who testified that the recording from the smart speaker could have been digitally altered. He spoke in highly technical jargon, referencing audio artifacts and spectral analysis, arguing that it was possible to create such a recording using advanced AI voice cloning technology. During cross-examination, however, prosecutor Raymond Perez methodically dismantled his credibility. He forced the expert to admit that he had found no direct evidence of tampering and that his testimony was based entirely on theoretical possibilities rather than factual analysis. The expert was exposed not as a scientist but as a paid storyteller, and his convoluted theories seemed to wither under the weight of Perez's simple, direct questions. The attempt to discredit the recording had failed. If anything, it had only made the defense seem more desperate and dishonest. The cornerstone of their new strategy, however, was Lily Porter herself. Against the frantic advice of his entire legal team, the lead attorney decided to call his client to the stand. He believed it was their only remaining chance, a final, desperate roll of the dice. He hoped that if Lily could project an image of a scared, wrongly accused young woman, she might be able to win the jury's sympathy and create a sliver of reasonable doubt. It was a catastrophic miscalculation, a fundamental misunderstanding of the client he was representing. He was about to hand the prosecution its most powerful weapon, Lily's own staggering arrogance. Lily, for her part, was thrilled. She had been waiting for this moment, the chance to take center stage and deliver the performance of a lifetime. When Lily Porter took the stand, she was the picture of confidence. She smiled at the jury, adjusted the microphone as if she were about to start a live stream, and answered her own lawyer's initial questions with a polished and rehearsed sincerity. She told a fabricated story of the night of the murder, painting her accomplice as a violent, unstable stalker who had forced her to participate in the crime under threat of her own life. She cried on cue, her voice trembling with manufactured fear. For a few moments, her performance was almost believable. She was an actress, and this was her greatest role. The illusion, however, was about to be shattered by a single, simple piece of evidence. During his cross-examination, Raymond Perez was patient and methodical. He did not yell or attack, he simply allowed Lily to spin her web of lies, her story growing more elaborate and less plausible with each question. Finally, he approached the witness stand. He asked her, in a calm and quiet voice, if she had ever purchased the specific industrial toxin that had been found in Mila's system. Lily, without a moment's hesitation, looked directly at the jury and said, "I have never even heard of that chemical. I have never seen it in my life." It was a clear, definitive, and utterly perjurious statement. Perez paused, letting her lie hang in the silent courtroom for a long, heavy moment before he turned to the projection screen. "Let's play the video," Perez said simply. The screen flickered to life, displaying security camera footage from a small independent shipping and packaging store in a remote part of Fairbanks, dated 1 month before the murder. The video showed a young woman at the counter, her face partially obscured by a hoodie, but still clearly recognizable as Lily Porter. She could be seen signing for a small, heavily wrapped package. Perez then presented a document, a subpoenaed shipping manifest from the dark web vendor, showing that the exact poison used to kill Mila Woods had been delivered to that specific store under a false name on that exact date. The signature on the manifest was a perfect match for Lily's. The final devastating blow came when Perez played a second video, this one from a hardware store, taken the very next day. It showed Lily, clear as day, purchasing a pair of heavy-duty chemical-resistant gloves and a small, precise syringe, the tools of a poisoner. The courtroom erupted. Lily Porter's face, which had been a mask of confident composure, crumbled into a portrait of pure, unadulterated rage. She stood up and screamed at Perez, calling him a liar and accusing him of faking the evidence. Her polished performance had vanished, replaced by the raw, unfiltered fury of a narcissist who had been caught and exposed. The judge slammed his gavel, calling for order, but it was too late. The jury had seen everything they needed to see. They had seen her lie, and they had seen the undeniable, videotaped proof of that lie. The defense's entire case, built on a foundation of falsehoods, had been demolished in a matter of seconds. Her own lawyer slumped in his chair, his head in his hands, the full weight of his client's catastrophic decision to testify crashing down upon him. The lie about the weapon was more than just a tactical error. It was a window into Lily's soul. It revealed a person so confident in her own ability to deceive that she believed she could lie about something that had been recorded on video. It showed a profound disconnect from the concept of objective reality, a belief that the truth was whatever she said it was. In that moment, she was no longer a sympathetic character or a misunderstood youth. She was a proven perjurer, a manipulative and arrogant killer whose credibility had been irrevocably destroyed. The jury, which had been instructed to presume her innocence, now looked at her with open contempt and disgust. Her attempt to perform her way out of a murder charge had backfired in the most spectacular way imaginable. As bailiffs restrained a still screaming Lily and the judge called for a recess, Raymond Perez walked back to the prosecution's table, his expression grim but satisfied. He had known the videos existed from the early days of the investigation, but he had made the strategic decision to hold them back, waiting for the perfect moment to deploy them. He had gambled that Lily's own narcissism would lead her to take the stand and that her arrogance would compel her to lie. It was a brilliant and risky legal maneuver, a perfectly set trap that his opponent had walked directly into. The trial was not officially over, but in the minds of everyone who had witnessed the dramatic implosion on the stand, the verdict was already in. Lily Porter had not been undone by a clever lawyer or a surprise witness, but by her own reflection, captured on a security camera and played for the world to see. The trial was drawing to its inevitable conclusion. The defense, shattered by Lily Porter's disastrous testimony, presented a weak and disjointed closing argument, all but conceding defeat. It was now time for the final, and often most emotional phase of the trial before the jury would begin its deliberations, the victim impact statements. This was the moment for Mila Wood's family to address the court, and the killer directly to speak of the life that had been taken and the profound, unending grief that had been left in its place. It was a procedural formality, but in this case, it would provide the trial's ultimate breaking point, a moment of such raw and heartbreaking power that it would be remembered long after the verdict was read. Mila's father was the first to speak. He was a large, stoic man, a lifelong fisherman whose hands were rough and calloused from a life of hard work. He did not approach the podium with anger, but with a quiet, powerful sorrow that seemed to fill the room. He spoke of his daughter's childhood, of her love for the Alaskan wilderness, and of the immense pride he felt on the day he had driven her to college in Fairbanks. He did not look at Lily as he spoke. He addressed his words directly to the jury, his voice thick with emotion as he asked them to remember the girl in the video, the one with a bright, infectious laugh. His statement was a testament to a father's love, a simple and profound expression of a loss that was too vast to be contained by words. During his statement, Lily Porter yawned. It was not a subtle, stifled yawn, but a wide, theatrical gesture of profound boredom. She stretched her arms, rolled her eyes, and then began to examine her fingernails with an air of detached indifference. It was a gesture of such stunning and cruel disrespect that a wave of audible gasps and murmurs rippled through the courtroom gallery. She was not just ignoring the heartbroken father's words, she was actively mocking his pain, her actions a silent scream of narcissistic contempt. The jury watched her, their faces grim, every member visibly disgusted by her callous display. She was in that moment confirming every terrible thing the prosecution had said about her. Then it was Mila's mother's turn to speak. She walked to the podium, her steps slow and deliberate, and she placed a small, worn piece of paper on the lectern. She explained that a few weeks after Mila's death, while cleaning out her daughter's room, she had found a letter. It was a letter Mila had written to her future self as part of a high school English assignment, sealed in an envelope with the instruction, "Do not open until you are 25. With the judge's permission and with trembling hands, she opened the letter and began to read her daughter's own words to the court. The letter was a portrait of youthful optimism, a beautiful and heartbreaking testament to the future that had been stolen from her. In the letter, Mila wrote of her dreams. She dreamed of graduating from veterinary school and opening her own clinic for rescued animals in a small Alaskan town. She dreamed of falling in love, of getting married, and of having 2 children, a boy and a girl, whom she would teach to ski and to identify the constellations in the vast northern sky. She wrote with a pure and unblemished hope for the life she was so excited to live, her words painting a vivid picture of all the milestones she would now never reach. She even wrote about her friendships, expressing a hope that she and her best friend Lily would stay close forever, a line that caused a fresh wave of quiet sobs to sweep through the courtroom. It was a voice from the grave, a ghost of a future that now existed only on a folded piece of notebook paper. As her mother's voice cracked with the unbearable weight of the words she was reading, the letter transformed from a school assignment into a sacred text, a final, beautiful, and devastating account of a life stolen far too soon. It was the ultimate victim impact statement, written by the victim herself. The emotional weight in the room became almost unbearable. Jurors openly wept, their professional detachment washed away by the raw and undeniable humanity of Mila's words. Even the stone-faced bailiffs seemed to struggle to maintain their composure. The letter had accomplished what no lawyer or witness could. It had made the loss of Mila Woods a tangible, personal, and deeply felt tragedy for everyone in the room. It was a powerful reminder that the person at the center of this legal drama was not the smirking TikTok star at the defendant's table, but the kind-hearted young woman who had dreamed of a future filled with family, purpose, and the simple joys of a life well lived. Lily Porter, however, remained unmoved. As Mila's mother finished reading and returned to her seat, her body shaking with grief, Lily leaned toward her lawyer. She whispered something, and then let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a sound so jarring, so completely out of place in the sacred silence of the courtroom that it felt like a physical blow. She was laughing at the dead girl's dreams. She was laughing at a grieving mother's pain. It was the breaking point. The moment when any last lingering shred of humanity the jury might have projected onto her was utterly and completely annihilated. They were no longer looking at a defendant, they were looking at a monster, a creature so devoid of empathy that the profound sorrow of others was nothing more than a source of private amusement. In the isolated quiet of the Alaskan court, that single, cruel laugh was the only confession the jury would ever need. The breaking point had been reached, not through a clever legal argument or a dramatic revelation, but through a simple, heartbreaking letter and the monstrous, inhuman reaction of the person who had rendered all its beautiful dreams to dust. The closing arguments were a formality. Prosecutor Raymond Perez calmly and methodically summarized the mountain of evidence against Lily Porter, ending his presentation by playing the smart speaker recording one last time, letting Lily's own cruel words be the final thing the jury heard from the prosecution. The defense attorney offered a brief and listless summary of his failed conspiracy theory, his heart clearly no longer in the fight. The jury filed out, and the wait for the verdict began. But before the jury would return, the prosecution had orchestrated one final shocking twist, a piece of live courtroom theater designed to reveal the ultimate hidden motive behind the murder of Mila Woods. A motive that was even darker and more twisted than anyone could have imagined. The prosecution had filed a motion to call one last rebuttal witness, a surprise that had been kept under wraps until this very moment. The judge, intrigued by the unusual request, granted the motion, the courtroom doors opened, and a woman was escorted to the stand by a bailiff. She was a woman in her late 40s, her face etched with a profound and weary sadness. The gallery murmured in confusion, and even Lily Porter looked momentarily surprised, her bored facade replaced by a flicker of genuine curiosity. The woman was sworn in, and Raymond Perez approached the witness stand. "For the record," he began, "could you please state your name and your relationship to the victim, Mila Woods?" The woman took a deep, shaky breath. "My name is Sarah Woods," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "I am Mila's mother." This was not the final revelation. Perez paused, letting the statement hang in the air before continuing. "Mrs. Woods," he said gently, "was Mila your only child?" Sarah Woods shook her head. "No," she replied. "I have another daughter. An older daughter." Perez then asked, "And what is your older daughter's name?" The woman turned her head, her gaze locking for the first time with the defendant. Her eyes filled with a mixture of grief, shame, and a terrible resigned sorrow, fixed upon the young woman who had been laughing and doodling her way through the trial. In a voice that was barely a whisper but carried to every corner of the silent courtroom, she said, "Her name is Lily Porter." The courtroom erupted in a tidal wave of shock and confusion. Lily Porter's own mother, the woman who had sat behind her in solidarity throughout the entire trial, was Mila Woods' mother as well. They were sisters. The revelation was a seismic shock, a piece of information so stunning that it defied comprehension. The entire narrative of the case, a toxic friendship between two college students, was instantly obliterated, replaced by a dark and twisted family tragedy. Lily and Mila were not just friends, they were half-sisters, a fact that Lily had kept secret from everyone, including her accomplice and her legions of online followers. Sarah Woods, in a voice choked with a grief that was now revealed to be impossibly complex, explained the family's hidden history. She had given Lily up for adoption as a teenager, a painful decision made under difficult circumstances. Years later, after she had married and had Mila, she had reconnected with her firstborn daughter, hoping to build a relationship and bring her two children together. Lily, however, had wanted nothing to do with her biological mother or the sweet, unassuming half-sister who represented a life of simple, familial love that Lily openly scorned. The true motive for the murder was now horrifyingly clear. Lily Porter had not killed Mila Woods for fame or for content or for the thrill of a shared pact. Those had been lies, a smokescreen to hide a motive that was far more personal and far more monstrous. She had killed her sister out of a deep and pathological jealousy, a venomous resentment for the life Mila had been given, a life with a loving, stable family that Lily herself had been denied. Mila was a living, breathing embodiment of everything Lily felt she had lost, and her existence was an intolerable affront to Lily's narcissistic worldview. The murder was not an act of ambition, it was an act of pure spiteful rage, a calculated and cruel attempt to destroy the one person who represented the happy childhood she never had. She did not want to be a sister, she wanted to be an only child, the sole focus of her mother's world, even if that focus was now through the prism of a murder trial. But there was one final, even more sickening layer to the story. Sarah Woods revealed that Lily had been systematically tormenting her for months leading up to the murder. Lily had used the threat of revealing their secret relationship to the world as a form of emotional blackmail, demanding money and attention from the mother who was desperate to keep her. The true target of the crime, the person Lily had truly wanted to hurt, was not Mila at all. The true target was her own mother. Lily had killed Mila to inflict the maximum possible pain on Sarah Woods, a final monstrous act of revenge against the woman who had given her away. The smart speaker recording took on a new, even more horrifying meaning. When she said, "You're going to make me famous," she was not just talking about the act of killing, but about the sensational, media-frenzied trial she knew would follow, a trial that would force her mother to publicly acknowledge her and the secrets she had kept buried for so long. Lily Porter's reaction to her mother's testimony was the final, definitive proof of her evil. She did not cry or show remorse. She simply stared at the woman on the stand, her expression cold and triumphant. She had won. She had successfully manipulated everyone, the police, the media, her accomplice, and even her own defense team, hiding her true motive until the last possible moment. She had forced her mother to reveal their secret on a national stage, turning her family's private pain into a public spectacle. It was the ultimate act of narcissistic control, a final, devastating performance in which she had made her own mother the star witness to her depravity. The jury, which had been on the verge of deliberation, was brought back into the courtroom, their faces ashen. They had thought they understood the case, but the final revelation had shown them a level of malice that was almost beyond human comprehension. The verdict was now a foregone conclusion. Lily Porter had not just killed her sister, she had tried to annihilate her entire family from the inside out, a crime of such profound and personal cruelty that it would leave scars that would never heal. The final twist was not about evidence or alibis, it was about the horrifying truth of a family destroyed by its own hidden darkness. The jury's deliberation was one of the shortest in Alaskan history. They were out for just under an hour before returning with a verdict. The courtroom was once again packed, the air electric with a tension that was almost unbearable. Lily Porter was led to the defendant's table, and for the first time since the trial began, her confident smirk was gone, replaced by a flicker of what looked like genuine apprehension. The jury foreman, a stern-faced man in his 60s, stood and handed the verdict to the bailiff, his hand trembling slightly. He refused to look at the defendant. The court clerk took the paper and in a clear, unwavering voice, read the verdict. On the charge of murder in the first degree, we, the jury, find the defendant, Lily Porter, guilty. A collective sigh of relief and sorrow washed over the gallery, and Mila Woods' family collapsed into quiet, tearful embraces. Justice, it seemed, had finally been served. The sentencing hearing was held 1 week later. The courtroom was just as crowded, but the atmosphere had changed. The tension of the trial had been replaced by a grim sense of finality. Raymond Perez argued for the maximum possible sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole. He spoke of the calculated, premeditated nature of the crime, the profound betrayal of a sister, and the monstrous, unrepentant narcissism Lily had displayed throughout the entire legal process. He argued that she was not a candidate for rehabilitation, but a predator who would remain a danger to society for the rest of her life. He ended his argument by once again showing the jury the silent, joyful video of Mila playing with the puppies, a final reminder of the bright, beautiful life that had been so cruelly extinguished. Lily's defense attorney, his voice weary and resigned, pleaded for leniency. He spoke of her youth, of the psychological damage of being given up for adoption, and argued that a life sentence was tantamount to giving up on a child. He asked the judge to consider the possibility of parole, to leave open a door, however small, for a future in which Lily might one day feel remorse and seek redemption. It was a standard, almost robotic plea, the final, obligatory words from a lawyer who knew his client deserved none of the mercy he was asking for. Throughout his lawyer's speech, Lily remained impassive, her expression a blank mask of indifference, her eyes scanning the room as if searching for a camera that was no longer there. Then it was time for the final victim impact statements, the last chance for Mila's family to address the court before the sentence was handed down. Mila's father spoke again, his voice stronger this time, his words a quiet but powerful testament to his daughter's enduring legacy. He announced that his family was starting a charitable foundation in Mila's name, one that would provide scholarships for veterinary students and support for animal shelters across Alaska. He spoke of turning their grief into a positive force, of ensuring that Mila's kindness would continue to ripple out into the world. It was an act of profound grace, a refusal to let Lily's hatred be the final word in his daughter's story. He was choosing to build a legacy of love on the ashes of his personal tragedy. Finally, Sarah Woods, the mother of both the victim and the killer, approached the podium one last time. The courtroom fell into a deep, respectful silence. She looked not at the judge nor at the jury, but directly at her daughter, Lily. Her face was not filled with anger or hatred, but with a sorrow so deep it seemed almost infinite. She spoke of her own guilt, of the regret she would carry for the rest of her life for the choices she had made as a young girl. And then, she did something that no one in the courtroom, least of all Lily Porter, could have ever anticipated. "Lily," she said, her voice shaking but resolute, "I will never understand why you did this. You have taken everything from me. But I am your mother, and I cannot hold this hatred in my heart. I forgive you." The words hung in the air, a statement of such unbelievable and undeserved grace that it seemed to stun the very soul of the room. Forgiveness was the one thing Lily had not expected, the one thing she could not control or manipulate. It was a power her mother possessed that she could not comprehend, and for the first time Lily's mask of cold indifference completely shattered, her face contorted, not in gratitude but in a look of pure, animalistic rage. She had wanted to torture her mother, to break her, to force her to live in a world of unending hateful grief. Forgiveness was not a gift. It was a denial of her power, a refusal to be destroyed. The statement seemed to torture Lily more than any prison sentence ever could. She began to sob, not tears of remorse, but tears of frustrated, impotent fury. Her final, cruel performance had been upstaged by an act of radical, unconditional love. The judge, a man who had presided over hundreds of sentencing hearings, seemed visibly moved. He took a long moment to compose himself before he addressed the defendant. He spoke of the sanctity of life, of the profound evil of her actions, and of the incredible strength and grace shown by her family. And then he delivered his sentence. He sentenced Lily Porter to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring that she would never again have the chance to harm another innocent person. As the sentence was read, Lily's sobs of rage subsided, replaced by the empty, hollow-eyed stare of someone who was finally and completely defeated. As the bailiffs led her from the courtroom, she was no longer a TikTok star or a master manipulator. She was just a small, pathetic figure, a convicted murderer stripped of her audience and her power, destined to spend the rest of her life in the cold, unforgiving silence of a prison cell, a silence that would be haunted forever by a single, impossible word: forgiveness.